Okay, we're connecting, preparing to live stream the meeting. All right.
Good evening. Introduce to you this evening the new live chat podcast called Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. When you have wounded people, you have wounded churches, and that has an effect on doing God's will in detail. On this podcast, we promote forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing. This is accomplished by creating a safe platform of discussion, of course, without names or places. Topics we're going to cover are sexual abuse, religious disenfranchisement, church division, and all major types of addictions. We offer live counseling sessions, a continuum, and meaningful question and answer. The team includes Olita Williams, author, contributor of Arise magazine, Linda Holmes, LP and with years of experience, Ms. Tennille, our technical director, founder, Arise magazine and newsletter. And my name is Prince, licensed counselor and founder of Antioch Youth Center counseling program here in Macon, Georgia. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect the ideas, mores of the Wounded Heart, Wounded Church staff. Be advised, this topic contains sensitive content. Some may find it offensive or disturbing. So we want to add that parental discretion is strongly advised. We have two very special guests here this evening. Our original guest had to cancel. However, Miss Debbie stepped in and we're glad she did. She's been active for years in the SNA program. She has a grasp of the 12 steps and how they relate to sexual addiction in terms of biblically basis application. She's involved in presenting group leadership and supporting new chapters in the country and chapters outside the country also too. And our second guests are our listeners. You can get involved with questions or comments. Go to YouTube, churchofgodmacongeorgia.com. Wounded Hearts, go to there. You can get right on with your questions and your comments. Also, you can contact our office at 478-784-7600. Email us at reach1@aol.com or Google us, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. Deb, I want to give some statistics that will start us out tonight. Statistics indicate from Focus on the Family, they did a study and 38% male and female ministers did inappropriate behavior with their constituency. Other religious groups around the country have spent millions of dollars on legal payments, issues, payoffs, things like that. Years ago, I was able to identify 25 ministers and pastors who had fallen, many of them sexual issues. Even in the Bible, the wisest man, the first man, the man after God's own heart, the strongest man, all had sexual issues. As a licensed counselor for years, 70% of my clients had issues with S&D. Deb, tell us about SNA.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. My name is Devon, West Virginia, tonight, right. To preserve anonymity. And
sure.
I've been a member of Sex Addicts Anonymous for almost 9 years. In 1 month, it will be 9 years. And I've learned so much. I've learned about compulsive sexual behaviors from my own healing journey. And I've also learned about being the recipient of somebody else's disease and how to heal from that. And I also learned about compulsive sexual avoidance, which SAA also covers. So pretty much wherever a person is coming from with sexual issues and challenges, the 12 steps of Sex Addicts Anonymous, which are adopted from AA's 12 steps and adapted to relate to sex addiction and recovery from sexual avoidance, compulsive intimacy avoidance. There's kind of a wide umbrella of behaviors that the steps can be applied to help healing. Basically, with my experience, what has happened is I have been able to connect more deeply with the higher power of my understanding, whom I call God, and be able to connect more deeply with myself, understand where the wounding is, rely on people outside of myself who understand this journey to help me to heal, and be able to find a safe place where I can freely share my junk and hear other people's, hold space for other people's wounded junk as well. And in that safe space, there's a deeper healing available than a lot of other places that I've been and a lot of other groups that I've been a part of.
Yep. Can a person be addicted sexually and not know it?
Absolutely. I started this journey as the spouse. I do have permission to mention this. The spouse of somebody whose addictive sexual behavior was affecting my life. And I went online to research S fellowships. There are several. SAA is one of several fellowships that start with the letter S and end in the letter A. So I went online to research S fellowships, and I found a list of behaviors that describe compulsive sexual avoidance. And at the time, I did not know that that's what I had either. So when I found that list, which includes things like starting fights with a spouse or partner to avoid sexual relations, or compulsive watching pornography, masturbation, that's actually compulsive sexual avoidance because it's being sexual, but it's avoiding connecting with another human being. I saw those symptoms and I related, and then I realized, oh, I'm living in a fantasy world. Like all the time, my brain is completely obsessed with sexual behaviors. But when it came time to be with my husband, I couldn't. There was a very huge divide in my spirit, in my body. I could not connect those two things. And a lot of times that's the case. People might be doing behaviors like, for example, a lot of people might be watching porn. That's the most common. But they might be promiscuous. They might be having serial relationships. In fact, I'll share my screen if people want to read this while I'm talking about it. There we go. Mental or romantic obsession, which is what I suffered from. Sexual anorexia, which is also what I suffer from. Love addiction, relationship addiction. So even including paying for sex or selling sexual behaviors. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, wait a minute. I see love addiction. Is that what I think it is? That the person is the way a gambler needs to win, the way an addict needs a bottle of liquor, the way a person needs love. Is that the same scenario that goes with those others?
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Extremely.
Yes.
Wow.
And what this is a distortion.
Wow.
We're using sexual behaviors to get high, to have a sense of power or control, instead of, uniting with somebody and bonding and connecting the way God intended. It becomes something that takes over, something that we use to control how we feel or to control other people. And, even with paying for sexual behaviors or selling, a lot of people think that's a great, easy way to get money, but it's so damaging. There are such high costs. So, by the
way a drug dealer has control over the drug user, if a person sees that you have that addiction, they can use that against you, can't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it gives us the illusion of power or control, but actually it's the addiction that's in control. Here are some of the costs of addictive sexual behaviors. We might lose time, money, career, job, relationships, divorce, physical, mental, spiritual health, freedom. We might be incarcerated or other forms of not being free. I wasn't free. I was stuck.
Wow.
Or, like with all addictions, it could end in death. There are many different ways that a person could die because of sex addiction, but it's a serious thing, so it's not something to be taken lightly. And that's why I like to view it as a disease. A lot of us in SAA view our addiction as a disease. Not that I'm a bad person or I'm just weak, I don't have enough willpower, but it has become to the point where I don't have the ability to not do it. It might have started off that way. But for me, my addiction started when I was 6. I was sexualized as a very young person. So I quickly learned, if I do this, it makes me feel good. And then I don't have to feel that. And then I learned, okay, anytime I'm sad or angry or scared, I can just do this behavior or think about this and it all goes away. And that's how some of us do get started on that path. But it becomes a compulsion. It becomes stronger than our will to resist. And it takes over, like for me, I saw people as collections of body parts. I didn't see them as human beings. And that made me feel powerful and in control. Because of men hurting me, I hated and feared all men. So if I could see them as objects, then I didn't have to be as afraid of them. Of course, I didn't know any of this is all subconscious. But because of healing in recovery, I can now not do these things. I don't have to change my feelings and change my state of consciousness. I don't have to get high. I can handle uncomfortable emotions. I can talk them out. I can reach out to God, my higher power, and receive that help and guidance and know how to handle situations that used to baffle me. And, my self-care is extremely different than it used to be. Sexual thoughts and feelings and behaviors can take over a person's life, even just the basic needs of life. So those are some ways that we can tell if it's a problem, if it's taking over. And especially if we've tried different things to stop and we can't, and we keep going back to these destructive behaviors that have these horrible consequences, which make no sense for us to keep going back to, then it's probably an addiction.
Is there a connection between sexual abuse and being addicted?
Often there is. For me, definitely. And for many of the people that I work with, I'm a sponsor, which means a guide. I help people work the 12 steps of SAA. And that has been the case for most of us. Sometimes it's helpful to know where it started, and sometimes it's really not. Focusing on the behaviors themselves can sometimes be deceptive. There's an assessment here on this website, saa-recovery.org, saa-recovery.org, with some questions to self-assess whether or not a person is a sex addict. And if that feels like the case, then working the 12 steps can help us have a spiritual awakening, which helps us not only stop doing these compulsive sexual behaviors that are wrecking our lives, but also start doing the behaviors that enhance our lives. Like feeling my emotions and sharing them with those people, like spending time with my family and friends that I say that I care about, but sometimes don't prioritize, like really spending time with God and understanding how God speaks to me and what that feels like. I could do none of that before recovery. I was just very disconnected because I never was taught how to deal with reality. Because of not only sexual trauma, but other types of trauma in my life, I was never taught that it's okay to feel feelings and it's okay to talk about them. I was never taught about boundaries. I was never taught how to speak my truth and ask for what I need. I was taught how to deny what I needed. I was taught how to medicate my emotions, with sexual behaviors and other compulsive behaviors that kept me high all the time. There's brain science behind this. It has to do with, the nervous system and the brain stem, and I won't get into that, but there's a reason why these behaviors work. They generate brain chemicals that make us feel good, and they're supposed to. Our bodies are built that way so that we can enjoy bonding with our intended partner, our spouse, in my opinion. But when I used those behaviors in a different, distorted way, it took away my ability to bond and connect with my partner, and it left me feeling empty. it created that addictive cycle that it was never enough. And it just left me empty and afraid and dark inside all the time.
And
Wow.
and of course, do you have a question?
Well, I had, at what point do you realize that, okay, wait a minute, I have a problem? At what point do you recognize that this is not normal? Because for some people, this might be normal behavior.
Right. And it might be, you know, and I guess each person gets to decide for themselves whether or not it's taking over their life. But if a person tries to stop and can't stay stopped for very long, it might be a problem. Or if there are increasingly severe and negative consequences, that it might be a problem if it's starting to take over. Like, for example, if a person is a student and instead of studying for an exam, they're online watching porn, or they're out with somebody they barely know being sexual, that is a problem. They might pick up a sexually transmitted infection. They might wreck a marriage. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to ruin one's life with compulsive sexual behaviors. And I also want to mention, it's compulsive sexual avoidance has just as terrible consequences. They may look differently, but you know, if I wasn't able to be sexual with my husband, it may have given him encouragement to find that somewhere else, you know. And I wasn't feeling fulfilled, and so, you know, it was wrecking my life as well. And just intimacy avoidance in general, in my opinion, all sex addicts are intimacy avoidant, even though they may not think that that applies. The word intimacy to me means connection, relationship. And with sex addiction, using sexuality like a drug is not about relationship or connection. It's about getting high. So that's how I knew that my behaviors weren't healthy for me. You know, it was not what I wanted. But I didn't know that until I started experiencing something different. When I came into the virtual rooms, I mostly attend telephone meetings and video meetings, the rooms of SAA, and I heard people, honestly, especially men, sharing how they feel and what they think and how they're applying the spiritual principles of the 12 steps in their lives and experiencing healing. When I heard that, I realized this is what is missing in my life. Nobody around me talks like that. Everybody's checked out on their devices or talking about what they're buying at the store or what's on TV or whatever, you know, or joking around about stuff, but nobody talks very honestly about their own personal things. And I realized I couldn't do that either. And when I found a safe place to start doing that, it affected everything. Go ahead.
I think we have a question coming in.
Yeah, someone on our audience asks, how do people end up being addicts, and is it different for each person?
Yes to the last question. It is different for each person. There are so many different behaviors. What I showed earlier is not necessarily an exhaustive list by any means, but how do they become an addict? Well, there's a lot of different paths, I think. I'm going to just show this screen here. For some, it may start with sexual trauma. For others, it may start with curiosity. For me, it was part trauma, and it was also the family that I grew up in was very religious, which was awesome, but they were also very uncomfortable talking about sexuality, so it was hush hush. And so when I discovered, because of what happened to me, sexual behaviors, I couldn't go to my parents and even describe what was happening. I, didn't have the relationship of trust and closeness with them that I could even describe what was going on. So there was that it's not okay to have any emotions except for happy, positive ones. And so I quickly learned how to eat and compulsively do sexual behaviors to mask what I was feeling. So, and it could have been a mixture of growing up and starting to develop and discover my sexuality mixed with those distortions and the unsafe environment that just, kind of made perfect fertile ground for an unhealthy sexual behaviors and attitudes.
I'm just going over these 12 steps, which I'm pretty familiar. And I like step one. It says, we admitted we were powerless. Coming to yourself saying, look, I'm in this and I can't get out. So I've got to be able to admit that to myself, that I am powerless over this behavior, no matter what it might be, but sexual sin we're talking about, basically. Is that right?
Yes. And, I have a challenge with the 1935 AA word powerless, because as a survivor, that word can be triggering. But for me, I like to, the meaning of the word powerless for me is like autopilot. That's my autopilot. I can't control what thoughts pop in my head. I can't control what feelings come up for me. And when I get started with something, I can't stop it. So it's, for me, my autopilot is certain compulsive sexual behaviors, and they made my life unmanageable. But admitting that I, of myself, could not do anything to change that was super important, because the next step is realizing that there is a power greater than myself that can help me. And it has to be outside of my own willpower, my own, wise brain thinking, which got me into the rooms of recovery. It has to be something beyond just me, because when I try to do it alone, I fail over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yep. So I got a question for you. Can God, let's say we're talking to someone in the listening audience, either they may be addicted or they know someone who is, based on statistics, and they're looking for help. Can God deliver them?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
My problem, though, was I could not connect directly with God before recovery. Even though I was an active member of church, I was even a missionary for a couple of years. I talked with a lot of people about Jesus Christ, and I helped them come to Christ. And I thought I had a good relationship with the God of my understanding. And I did. What I was capable of at that time, I absolutely did. The problem was when it came to sexuality, because I was raised in an environment where we couldn't talk about it and it wasn't safe to be honest about things, and it was very hush-hush, and it was also connected with fear and shame and negativity in my mind because of those experiences that I had. That bled into my relationship with God. So I thought that I had to clean myself up before approaching God. And I couldn't connect with God directly, which is why I needed the 12-step meetings. And I'll share my screen here to show where some meetings are available. With the COVID virus, a lot of the in-person meetings are using phone and video. And this website here, SAAtalk.info, is an intergroup. It's a group of groups, over 100 groups. And if you go to SAAtalk.info and click on Find a Telemeeting here on that left side, you'll get a list. I took a screenshot a little bit earlier. This is the rest of today and into tomorrow. There's a whole bunch of meetings, as you can see. There's different languages. You have to watch for which language you speak. And if you want a mixed gender meeting or women only or men only or LGBT or whatever, some of them are on the phone and some of them are Zoom video. You can see where it says audio or video here and the days and the times. So you can click on any one of those and they'll give more information about that particular meeting. And this is the easiest site for me, this SAAtalk.info, to find a lot of different meetings. There's some on the other website, saa-recovery.org, but it's mostly focused on, there's a map, and it's mostly focused on in-person meetings, which, like I said, a lot of them aren't happening right now, but a lot of them have gone to Zoom. So if there are meetings that people want to find out about on that website, they can contact the meeting contact and find out how to join in on the Zoom. And then maybe when it goes back to in-person, then they'll be able to attend the in-person meetings.
I'm looking at these 12 steps still, and I noticed 6 and 7, 6 says we are entirely ready to have God remove all our defects of character. And 7 says, ask God to remove all our shortcomings. That is really something. All your defects of character and all your shortcomings. Wow, that's real deliverance, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm laughing because of, again, the 1930s AA type way of using language, but I've never been entirely ready. I might be entirely ready in one moment. That counts, right? But that shifts and changes. And humbly asking God to remove my shortcomings is something that I've done all my life. I think for me in recovery, one way of looking at this, which was really helpful for me, was to let God choose what he was going to remove instead of me asking, here's my list of things that I want you to change about me. It's more surrendering my will to his will. And that doesn't mean that I don't get to do what I want. I have to do everything that God tells me to do. Not exactly. It's more like what I want becomes the same as what God wants for me. My will aligns with God's will because God loves me and he wants what's best for me. And sometimes I don't know what's best for me. So when I can receive that guidance and align my will with God, then I'm more apt to be ready to admit what the exact nature of our wrongs that's referenced in step 5 isn't necessarily a detailed list of all the bad things that I've done. It's what's behind that. What is running the show here? What is my fear? What lies am I believing, or what lies am I telling myself? A lot of times my dishonesty, whether it's intentional or not, is what's harming. That's what's causing me the pain. Like if somebody says something mean about me, I didn't know that I can choose to believe it or not. I just automatically believed everything that everybody said about me, and then that caused me to feel bad, about myself. And also there's, the internal critic telling me mean things about myself that I can choose to believe or not believe. But if I am not even aware of that, then I can't give that to God and ask for that to be changed. It's very important for me to recognize what's going on with me. Go ahead.
Our time is just about gone. In our last remaining moments, what would you want to say to the person this is new to them? They didn't know about being sexually addicted. They've heard about the drugs and the gambling, the eating, but they didn't know about this. What would be your message to that person who's not sure? It caught his ear, but what would be your message to that person?
Well, test it out. Oops, that's information. Step 12 wasn't on here. It might have accidentally got cut off. Anyway, I would say test it out because a lot of people have joined the meeting not really sure if they identify or qualify, and they listen to the shares, and then they hear their story coming out of the mouth of someone else, and then they say, oh my goodness, I belong here. I'm in the right place. And, it's scary. It takes a lot of courage to admit that my life is unmanageable and I have lost the power to choose when it comes to sexual behavior. Nobody wants to say that. This is the club nobody wants to be a member of. but when it comes to wounded churches and wounded individuals, there can be so much healing. I'll wrap up by saying my first in-person SAA meeting was terrifying for me because I was afraid that I might come into contact with someone that had hurt children because I had been hurt as a child. And in fact, there was more than one person in that meeting that had hurt children. And when I heard their stories, I found myself feeling soft-hearted towards them because they described their pain, their angst, their compulsion, and their embarrassment, and their shame, and their fear, and all of these, emotions that I never imagined, being the victim. And that day I left the room a different person than when I attended. I was no longer a victim. I realized I have those same emotions. My behavior details might be very different, but I'm one of them, and being able to have that kind of synergy and that kind of healing in that space was something way beyond what I could have ever done by myself.
Wow. Deb, thanks so much. We're
Thanks,
talking about
Deb.
healing,
Yes.
forgiveness, reconciliation. Deb, thanks so much. You can contact us by email, Google, or call that office number. Thank you so much. Next Thursday, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. We'll see you again. Thanks so much. Thanks a lot, Deb.